The International Chamber of Commerce Sri Lanka is the national office of the Paris-based business organization. The ICC comprises of membership of 45 million members in 130 countries. Trade facilitation, export and import and cross-border trade and issues relating to freight forwarding and many other matters of importance are addressed by the ICC. ICC Sri Lanka works through several committees to debate, discuss and suggest solutions on subjects related to the mandate of the Chamber. Each of these commissions are led by professionals in the committee, with many committees functioning. ICC includes a membership committee, International Relations Committee, Policy and Advocacy Committee, Training and Development Committee, Banking Committee. ICC is the sole authorized guaranteeing agency for ATIACAN. It's an internationally accepted customs document which enables duty-free and tax-free temporary importation of items as commercial samples. The ATIACAN reduces costs and red tape. The ICC is also known for its popular publications invaluable for bankers, lawyers, arbitrators and anyone involved in cross-border trade. Its members are provided with a member's privilege card which includes discounts with multiple retailers. ICC Sri Lanka's vision is to be the organization of choice to advance international trade and investment for businesses in Sri Lanka. ICC Sri Lanka's mission is to be the change agent in national policy formulation and implementation and facilitator of global businesses with Sri Lanka and disseminator of information on the development of business utilizing the services of ICC Paris while continuing to be a facilitator of dispute resolution. In addition, the ICC Sri Lanka organizes seminars, lectures, meetings with business leaders, and gives recognition to Sri Lankan businesses for outstanding achievements. ICC can play a special role in connecting business to the world and be a driving force for all Sri Lankan businesses.
If you seek for business, look for insightful. If you seek for politics, look for anticipation. If you value lifestyle, look for the extraordinary. If you love sports, look for the passion. Daily FD. Be empowered.
Now more than ever, we need to reimagine. These times and our profession demand exponential change. Around the world, we are fueling the drive toward financial security for individuals and businesses scrambling for new ways of working. Together, we will re-energize a global economy recovering from unprecedented challenges by embracing new technologies, new ways of working, and creating reimagined paths to prosperity. Our work is meaningful. Today more than ever before, we can all be catalysts, professionals with a heightened ability to listen, to learn, to adapt and lead. To look at where we are and recognize the spark that will ignite innovation and change the world. For more than 100 years we've been here, guiding, advising and instilling confidence. We are here for good. And in this moment, we're called upon to create trust, opportunity, and prosperity for employers, clients, and the communities where we live. We will lead the re-emergence and help the world's economies and companies find a new and better normal. And we will use our collective vision, ability, and talent to make a real difference in the world. Working together, we will reimagine our future, starting now.
And this webinar has the sponsorship of Asean International Insurance Brokers Private Limited. And their expertise is in risk analysis, and they enable their team of professionals to identify insurance requirements of their clients and provide tailor-made risk transfer solutions. And their mission is to be there for their clients during the most critical of times. Asean International Insurance Brokers Private Limited. Greetings and welcome. So this is yet another webinar. In fact, the 12th in the post-COVID season of 2020. And this is under the aegis of the International Chamber of Commerce, Sri Lanka. And now, we would like to mention that this event is being broadcast or made available, accessed on several platforms, all on Facebook pages, the ICCSL Facebook page, the Daily FT, SEMA Sri Lanka, and also LNW, that's Lanka News Web. So we are very much focused on a particular subject, as you likely are aware, FDI, of the three letters, and of course it refers to foreign direct investment. In fact, the subject really goes further into attracting FDIs into Sri Lanka. So the idea being what we have now is insufficient and there needs to be more. Now, interestingly, since the season of the conflict has been now well in the past, Sri Lanka has recovered to a degree, and there has been a report that it has done pretty well by the year 2017. But however, there has been some concerns with underlying bottlenecks of poor cases of doing business and attracting the wrong types of investments and political uncertainty that have prevented Sri Lanka from ushering in optimal FDI gains throughout the post-war period. There is a very well-researched report that has been submitted and is available with IPS, and that's their latest publication, Firm-Level Analysis of Manufacturing Sector Investments in Sri Lanka. And there are several recommendations made. Now, since we are on the topic of FDI and attracting FDI into Sri Lanka, the scenario has changed somewhat. And we are now going to be able to play a video, a short clip, which helps us to appreciate why the problems or issues relating to attracting FDIs is now ever more complex. Watch carefully.
The global economic picture is dire, and a quick return to normal as predicted by some leaders is not supported by the economic data.
If you look at production, employment, trade, all are down. And I worry greatly for emerging markets. We have already seen somewhere in the range of $100 billion leave emerging markets since the beginning of January. And we're estimating that foreign direct investment will be down 40% in both 2020 and 2021 from its base in 2019.
The International Labour Organization says the COVID-19 pandemic could cause the equivalent of 195 million job losses globally, doubling the current figure, while a contraction of some 10% of the South African economy could see more than 1 million people join the ranks of the unemployed. The monthly jobs report in the United States out Friday expected to show unemployment ticking up beyond 15% from 3.6% before the crisis, while Europe's economy is expected to shrink by 7.4% this year alone.
It doesn't matter whether you're in a developed country or a developing country, locking down an economy creates insolvency. And what we're going to see is a rise in unemployment and a loss of jobs, liquidity issues at the firm level, and the longer the lockdown lasts, the more probability of insolvency.
Now, following that clip and appreciating the particular exigencies that we are facing, there are some comparable figures that are available for Asia. And this is a World Bank report that we have. In Asia, we have some competition, we might say. Sri Lanka does. US dollars, millions of US dollars. FDIs to the value of 50 billion in India. Vietnam, 16 billion. Pakistan, 2 million. Thailand, 6. Cambodia, 3 million. China, 155, all US dollars. Whereas Sri Lanka, it's 758 million US dollars in FDIs. Helps us to appreciate the nature of the issue or the problem and why it is that there has to be strategies employed to attract FDIs into Sri Lanka. But we now start off with our opening remarks, and we're delighted to be able to have with us the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce, linking with us from his office in Paris. That's John Denton. And he's an alumnus of Harvard Business School and also the University of Melbourne. And professionally, he's a global business leader and international advisor as well on policy. And he's a legal expert on international trade and investment. And for his services in his home country, he has been recognized as, with the titular honor, the Officer of the Order of Australia, known by the letters OA. So here's John Denton to speak.
Thank you very much, everyone, and it's great to be with the team in Sri Lanka. What a fantastic subject that we're going to discuss today. I want to make 4 key points, and I'll say them up front. The first is just to be very clear with you, the 3 letters you mentioned, Arun, FDI, foreign direct investment, at a global level is in crisis. We've seen a huge drop in FDI this year, below the trough seen during the global financial crisis. So let's be clear on that. The second is that strategies to attract FDI will be essential. That's why this seminar is so useful, I think, for Sri Lanka. And we should bear in mind the fundamentals: liberalization, predictability, consistency, and of course, rule of law. But the third point is we must not forget the sovereign debt crisis facing the international community. Debt overhangs constrain the benefits of FDI, and we must do something about that. And finally, it's not the first time I say it, but I'll say it in this context as well, because we do want the world's peak economic governance, the G20, to do something more than they're doing now. And I have called upon, and I call upon the G20 presidency, which next year will be Italy, to hold an emergency G20 Leaders Summit as soon as possible in 2021, with full engagement from the Biden administration to address the financing challenges of COVID-19. I make those 4 points as these are key elements that we will continue to make on a global basis. Specifically though, friends, the subject of today's session, strategies to attract foreign direct investment, is a vitally important one, and this session comes at a moment of crisis. As I said in my introductory comments, this pandemic is a supply, demand, and policy shock to FDI. All at once, it's happened simultaneously. Lockdown measures imposed across the world to combat the virus have constrained supply. Demand has contracted as economies fall into recession, with multinationals, as you would have seen, reassessing their appetite to new products and projects. And governments have taken policy measures during this crisis to actually restrict new investments. I've seen that in my own country, in Australia. We've seen that in Canada. We've seen that in France. We've seen that in Germany. and the United Kingdom as well. They've all tightened FDI screening regimes, and China, India, and South Africa have made changes as well. As UNCTAD's 2020 World Investment Report states, all too clearly, global flows of FDI are expected to decrease by up to 40% in 2020 from the 2019 value of 1.5 trillion. That is a huge trough. It appears that FDI is set to drop well below the low point reached during the global financial crisis, undoing the already lackluster growth of international investment over the last decades. It's a hallmark of this crisis that emerging markets have borne the brunt, and I'm sorry to say that, but it's true. If not just with respect to caseloads and fatalities, but certainly in terms of economic devastation. One of the things we noted up front, which is why we launched an extraordinary campaign to save our SMEs, was that the economic devastation of that supply and demand shock and policy, lack of policy innovation actually happened, particularly in emerging economies, before the impact of the health crisis. And we've seen that particularly in global value chains like travel and tourism, the garment sector, all elements which are very important to a country like Sri Lanka. Viewed in this context, there have never been a more important time to devise strategies to attract and boost FDI. I'm sure the discussion today will raise a number of novel strategies to attract FDI in these challenging times, but I want to recall the fundamentals. I want to re-emphasize the fundamentals. First, the policy environment. To attract FDI, investors must be assured of the stability, predictability, and consistency of the policy environment in given country. I'm also on the board of a global investor, infrastructure investor, IFM Global. We invest something like $160 billion, not just in Australia, but we invest more than half of that in global infrastructure outside. We own toll roads. What do we look like? What do we look for when we're actually investing? We're looking for stability, predictability, and consistency. And most of a well-functioning system that abides by the rule of law. All essential. And finally, local governments must include support measures. You've got to have effective investment promotion agencies. You've got to have a capacity and a facility and a mechanism to make investing easy in your country. One-stop shops, alignment, political support, political alignment, leadership from the top, which is why it's so important to have the government on this call today. Practically, from my ICC hat, I sit on the steering committee of one such support measure housed within the United Nations Development Programme. It's called SDG Impact. SDG Impact seeks to bring together global project pipeline, development partners, and investor networks that will catalyse local solutions to achieve the SDGs. In recovering from this crisis, we are presented with an opportunity to transform our approach to FDI, effectively harnessing FDI to achieve sustainability imperatives such as the Sustainable Development Goals and net zero by 2050. 2050 is one such opportunity. We should keep these fundamentals in mind as we discuss strategies to attract FDI. But there is a short-term imperative that cannot be overlooked in this discussion. The sovereign debt crisis, and frankly, the G20's inadequate response to it. I said it in my opening comments. There's a real problem emerging. The contours are actually not that far away with the global debt crisis confronting emerging economies. But strangely, this also confronts middle-income economies as well. While well-intentioned, the G20's Debt Service Suspension Initiative, or DSSI, is far from the response required to adequately address the debt crisis. 46 countries so far, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, have availed themselves of this initiative, collectively gaining about 5.3 billion in relief from immediate debt payments. But this is only about 1.7% of total international debt payments due from all developing countries this year. As former economic advisor to President Barack Obama, Larry Summers put it, not so eloquently, but actually truthfully, the G20 DSSI is like a squirt gun meeting a massive conflagration. It is simply inadequate. To enable developing countries to adequately confront the economic and health dimensions of this crisis, we need a robust response that includes lower and middle income economies facing debt distress. not just lower economies, but also middle income economies as well. And let's not forget, there is a wealth of evidence pointing to the fact that high indebtedness can constrain economies from reaping the growth benefits of FDI. The DSSI should firstly apply to more countries, secondly, have a longer duration, and thirdly, include comparable treatment from private sector creditors. For this reason, I call, as I said in my opening comments, on the G20 to convene an emergency G20 Leaders Summit at the behest of the incoming presidency, which is Italy, at the first opportunity in Q1 of 2021 to adequately address the urgent financing needs of developing economies. Friends, at its best, FDI can help integrate emerging markets into global supply chains, boost economic growth and employment, enable exchange rate stability, and create competitive markets. Beyond these traditional benefits, the right FDI can also catalyze the structural transformation the world needs to meet our sustainability objectives and reach net zero by 2050. We need to create the right conditions to FDI, and strategies such as the ones to be discussed today will be critical in attracting FDI to propel the post-COVID-19 recovery. But right now, the G20 is letting emerging markets down. We need action from the G20 on debt relief, and we need it now. And you can be assured that the ICC is pushing this case on your behalf and on behalf of all developing economies. In particular, we applaud the actions of ICC Sri Lanka in bringing together such an important group of people to ensure that Sri Lanka is FDI ready and FDI prepared for 2021. Thank you for inviting me to speak. It's always been a pleasure to be with my friends in Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much. That was the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce speaking to us from Paris. Thank you very much, John. So we were able to appreciate at least 11 times John mentioned the word crisis. So it's not going to be plain sailing, is it? Now it's time to sound the keynote, for which we have invited the State Minister of Finance, Capital Markets, and State Enterprise Reforms of the government of Sri Lanka. That's Mr. Ajit Nivard Cabral. And he has served as a senior advisor to the Prime Minister on economic affairs until recent days. And formerly, prior to these current appointments, he also served as the 12th governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. And of course, now he's with the legislature. And as we said, it's time for the keynote, and we invite Ajit Nivard Cabral.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you very much. I first of all want to congratulate the ICC for organizing a virtual seminar of this nature, which is, I think, very useful for us to touch base with each other, to understand how and in which way we should respond to the current situation. And I think that's important for us to reflect upon. And at the same time, it was refreshing to hear John Denton in his remarks with regard to some of the underlying factors with regard to how we should attract FDI. I want to build up on what John Denton mentioned and go a little beyond, and then understand as to what conditions would prepare ourselves to receive FDI. I have been in the private sector for a long time before I assumed my government career. And the experiences that I have had there tell me that it's helpful if we were to be conscious of what actually drives investors into another country. What are the factors that they would look at, in addition to what John Denton mentioned with regard to the policy framework itself? There are other factors that generally would be key in helping those investors to make that decision. In my view, I think firstly, they want to see whether the macro fundamentals in a particular country are stable macro fundamentals. When I say macro fundamentals, whether there's growth in the country, whether the country's infrastructure is sound, whether the interest rates are of a level at which you can do business easily? How is the country's currency faring? Is that in a mode where you can predict whether it will be depreciating or appreciating? Those are very important factors when you go make a decision. If you find that the macro fundamentals are in disarray or are changing rapidly, it's very likely that investors would shy away from such a regime. So it's important for the platform to be sound, and in so doing, we got to ensure that the overall macro fundamentals are also sound. The second point that I would like to stress is for investor is the hard infrastructure that is available in a country. Whatever may be the macro fundamentals, even though those are in benign levels, if the road network, if the electricity availability, if the schools, if the health facilities that we have, the hospitals are not of a reasonably high degree and a standard, people will be reluctant to invest. Because with an investment, you want to see how that country will also be able to ensure your own livability. So I think in many countries, those that do not focus on this part, they generally fall aside. And that is why, if you remember, Sri Lanka took the very important step of developing our infrastructure, the road network, the expressways, the electricity availability, so that you will have 24-hour availability of electricity in all parts of the country. That was very important for people to ensure the availability of, because then and only then will many investors be inclined to come in and invest in a country. The third is their legal structure. When you come into a country, the legal and the administrative structure must also be sound. People look into that as well. Are the doing business indicators in good shape? Are the factors that help you to run your business, are those in good stead? Those are very, very important considerations. What are the labor laws like? What are the laws in relation to the investment like? Can you bring in your investment and take it out without any difficulty? If you bring it in, well, would that be protected? Those decisions are important as far as the investor is concerned. Then the soft infrastructure, the schools, the treatment available in a country. Those are also very important considerations. Is the country clean? Does it have a traffic problem? These are also important factors that engage the attention of many investors. Before an investor comes, they want to know what kind of a country am I going to make this investment. So any country which is attempting to get new investment to come in, they need to be conscious of all these factors at the same time. We cannot follow one from the other. We got to ensure that all these things go in tandem together. That is why, if you remember, way back in the 2006 to 2014 era, all these factors received the attention of the government simultaneously. We had to get over the problem with regard to our conflict that we had. We got over that. We ensured that the road network is improved, the electricity is improved, then the general cleanliness of the country was improved, the hospital network, the education, the international schools, the international quality of the treatment. These are all, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's a list that needs to be improved upon as we go on. And I'm sure many of you understand the context in which it is stated. That is extremely important that you provide in order to attract FDIs to come in. Arun did mention that last year the investment was only $750 million, which I agree. But way back in 2014, it was $1,800 million. And the projections were that we would reach $4,000 million by 2020. Somehow or the other, some of those factors that we should have been providing, the macro fundamentals, didn't live up to the need of the hour. Some of the other factors may have been a little less compelling, and therefore we lost out a little bit on those years as well. But nevertheless, if we were to get this right presently, I'm sure there'll be a lot of opportunities for investment coming. Just today, we launched in Sri Lanka the MOU in relation to the first iconic building that is going to come up in the new port city. Now, the port city provides amazing opportunities. So this new activity is an investment of $450 million, a joint venture between a Chinese developer and a Sri Lankan developer, which is a thrust area to come into the next phase of development in the port city. Already another $1 billion has been committed. I think mainly because we have been able to ensure that the macro fundamentals are moving in the right direction. Just last week, $300 million investment in the Hambantota Port industrial zone was committed to manufacture tires. The Chinese ambassador mentioned today's news has that a $600 million another tire factory is coming in the district of Kalutara. So now these are all designed to provide new impetus to this whole exercise. But I think it is on a platform of the sound macro fundamentals and the soft infrastructure being developed and the commitment of the government to improve the hard infrastructure as well, because that lays the foundation and the ability for the country to move forward. I also want to stress on the next point, which is another important part, that is you have to persuade investors to take a long-term view and a long-term commitment to a country. There are some investors who are short-term, naturally so. There are hedge funds that will come in for short-term investments, which is also important in the context of markets. But at the same time, the long-term investments who take a 5-year call, a 10-year call, must be given the necessary background support to tide through the first initial years. That's why sometimes the tax holidays, the protection in the lean periods are provided by governments, the assistance from one-stop shops, the kind of type of activity that John Denton spoke about. These are important to persuade long-term investors to come into a particular jurisdiction. So in that sense also, we got to promote the long-termism as against the short-termism for different types of instruments. FDI is initially of that nature. So the support from a country, from its infrastructure, which is the key infrastructure to support investment, must also be there. Tax regime which is consistent was already mentioned. Commitment of the banking sector to improve as time goes on so that they keep abreast of the developments all over the world. These actually would support the inflow of long-term funds into a country and commitment of those funds to projects as well as to industries as well as to services on a long-term basis. At the same time, your infrastructure with regard to customs, excise, inland revenue, airports, ports are also key factors in making the decision. Because if people have to struggle with those services, you would find very often that it's very difficult to attract good investors to come in. That is why a key part of the development in a country to attract foreign direct investment would be the improvement of the key factors that are embedded in the doing business indicators of the World Bank. Because if you were to target those areas and improve those services on a consistent basis, that also would give the message to outside investors that this particular country, for example, now here in Sri Lanka, that we mean business and we are aiming to help as well as protect all these industries as well as services to go forward. So attracting FDI is not merely handing the job over to a establishments such as the BOI. We got to support them with the necessary conditions that would make their life easier. We see the new chairman of the Board of Investment, Sanjay Mohotala here. I think there are very many features that they would have to promote Sri Lanka abroad. But at the same time, those of us who are in government need to also recognize our own contribution to this effort by ensuring that the rest of the facilities are also provided in order to make their life easier to promote the investments on a case-by-case basis. The legal system has to be improved. This year, the Sri Lankan government has committed 6 billion rupees to improve the court structure. New judges have been appointed in order to ensure that the delays that have taken place in the litigation is reduced. So these are all going hand by hand to ensure that the total structure is improved. So attracting FDI is not a function of one agency only. It is a team effort. A large number of institutions must get together to do so, and each one must do their part very well. One-stop shops are important. At the same time, the ensuring that all these sectors that I mentioned today are improved together with what John Denton also mentioned would enable Sri Lanka to position itself as a sound FDI attraction destination. Going forward, we have set some tough targets for ourselves. The next year, we have already committed ourselves to increasing the total investment to come from outside to at least $2,500 billion. I think it's a very achievable target. It's not a pie in the sky. The commitments that we have received so far tell us that it is possible to do that. We need to set our sights on a number of that nature and then work towards that. At the same time, going beyond 2022, I think we need to set our sights on numbers which are much higher than that so that we can actually ensure that the foreign direct investment plays a key role in increasing the total GDP growth in our country to the levels that we were used to prior to 2015. So that's a challenge. It's not a formidable challenge. It's a reasonable challenge. It's something that is doable, and we must all commit ourselves to move towards that range. So I'm thankful to the ICC for promoting such a seminar of this nature, and for this galaxy of speakers and panelists to discuss about the need to improve as well as the challenges that will be ahead of us. And I'm sure that will be the most important step in taking it forward. And I wish this conference all success, because I know it can have a very key impact on Sri Lanka's progress towards attracting a large number of FDIs for the future. Thank you very much.
Mr. Cabral, I reckon that you may not be remaining with us much longer, but just before you go, we would like to have the chairman of the ICC Sri Lanka, Mr. Dinesh Virakudi, have a short conversation with you. So over to Dinesh, please. Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Minister. Thank you very much for joining us. You are very supportive of ICC. We are very grateful to you. This, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep the questions very short. I have picked 4 questions that I thought will be useful. The first question is the downgrade by the rating agencies, in our view, was a bit too harsh, given that the world is facing a global pandemic. What is the government doing to win back their confidence?
See, actually, rating agencies are people who express opinions. They don't actually do any investment as such. If you notice, they had downgraded about 39 countries in the post-pandemic period, which in my view is quite unfair, because every single country was challenged by the COVID impact. And as John Denton says, the G20 countries or any of these multilateral institutions did not even come forward with any kind of a solution to assist them at all. It was a squirt gun approach, tiny little spurts of drops of water on this huge conflagration of fire. But all the countries had responded in the way that they thought best, and they had gone forward. So I think the way that the rating agencies have approached it shows that they have not been sensitive to this situation, and Sri Lanka has pointed that out in no uncertain terms. At the same time, what is interesting, Dinesh, is that many of the investors did not respond in the way that we would have expected them to respond to a rating agency downgrade. They understand the Sri Lankan credit. They understand the challenges as to how and also how we have dealt with it. And the markets have actually responded in a pretty positive manner, in not reading too much into what the rating agencies have said. So the response that we have had was to approach the investors direct. We have always been upfront and frank with our investors. I have done many Zoom calls as well as individual calls with the investors thereafter. We have had calls with all the bankers and key stakeholders, and we have given them our side of the story very clearly. And I think the market's response has been extraordinarily in favor of what Sri Lanka has been doing. If you take one case in point, in the last about 3 months since August, the total turnovers of the stock exchange in Sri Lanka has been 3 times that of the previous 5 years. You would have seen that the ASPI has been moving very rapidly. You would have seen that the commitment of Sri Lankan investors has been extraordinary. And that has been a very key factor in showing that the outside confidence, Dinesh, has been very strong. So we are buoyed by that. We are happy about that. But it also tells us there's a lot of things to be done, and we continue to do that in the time to come.
Yeah. John, can you hear me, John? I'd like to ask you a quick question. Do you think the international multilateral agencies are doing enough for the developing countries?
Short answer, no. I think one of the tragedies revealed by the pandemic is, one, in the lack of global cooperation, and two, the ability to move quickly to recognize that we're in 2021, not 2008. This is not a financial crisis, it's a real economy crisis. And the playbooks that were being used initially were just not adequate, which is why, as the Minister says, it's absolutely critical that the debt relief and the support from multilateral agencies is actually aligned to the real needs of real countries now, and in particular to developing countries, and the reality that middle-income economies are actually also struggling in this event as well. Definite pressure needs to be put on the G20 not to continue to kick this can down the road, but to grapple with it aggressively and forcefully in the first quarter of next year.
Okay, thank you. And John, another quick question. What can ICC do globally to sell Sri Lanka's story to the world?
Well, I mean, I got to tell you, you guys don't need a lot of help selling your story to the world. ICC Sri Lanka is a role model for ICCs globally. But what you can do is to continue to advocate with the minister to ensure that predictability, sustainability are all features of the Sri Lankan foreign investment roadmap. And in particular, we do respect, and we want to see respect for the rule of law and integrity. The issue of anti-corruption is actually critical. And so your alignment with the global headquarters of our policy pushes in all these areas, and your preparedness to speak truth to power is actually critical. Again, Minister, it's great to be on a panel with you. And I look forward to the opportunity to spending a bit of time with you, Colombo.
Thank you. Minister, the next question to you is, you have been clearly articulating the government strategy over the last couple of months, especially in Parliament. Do you have the soldiers on the ground to implement those strategies? That has been one of our biggest issues in Sri Lanka.
First of all, may I say thank you to John Denton for his remarks. We appreciate it very much, and you can be sure that we echo the same sentiments, John, mainly because we seem to sometimes lose track on the most important factors when we are confronted with the situation, and sometimes we lose out on the key aspects of what needs to be done. So I'm particularly glad that ICC and John has brought this out into the open, because it's vital that we look at these issues in that broad framework. The people on the ground, the boots on the ground, yes, we do have, except that they haven't really been harnessed very well for some time. So I think the challenge for us is to harness these people. If you see the COVID response of Sri Lanka, showed that it is possible to deal with even very, very difficult situations with a cohesive approach. And the people within the government sector as well as the private sector, they responded pretty well in dealing with these situations. We bounced back with our exports. We bounced back with our agricultural produce. Many of the industries started functioning again under very trying circumstances. We were able to balance between the health hazards as well as economic needs. So that's a tough equation, Dinesh. And in this last few weeks and months, it was shown very clearly that Sri Lanka has got what it takes to do so. It is just that we need to put these things together in taking it forward. So that will be the challenge. We are not downplaying the challenge. It is a big challenge. And I think if we get this thing together and then the coordination occurs, we would be in a position to actually deliver. Very quickly, I'll also tell you, we are hoping to open out the airport in due course for tourism as well as for business visitors to come. New regulations are being put in place to ensure the safety as well as the need for people to have a good holiday as well as do their business. So these are tough challenges, but I think we are getting there, and we'll have to make sure that the boots on the ground, that the people who are at the front lines are there with good briefings to ensure that these things actually could happen.
Minister, since we have a global audience here, what is your final question to you? What is your message to the world?
I'm saying Sri Lanka has a good platform to launch into the next phase of development. We have had the infrastructure developed. We have a good workforce. We have got very good soft infrastructure being developed, the health services, the educational services, the legal framework is being improved dramatically. We are attempting to maintain our macro fundamentals in good state. That has taken some beating in the past, but I think we are now on the right track. In the last 4 to 5 months, we have been on the right track. And I think if we can set the stage well, and the banking sector in which you are at the helm, Dinesh, you know that it is sound. There is a good focus as to where we want to go. So with all those contributions which will be pooled together, I think Sri Lanka will be a very, very good destination to attract foreign investment as well as to continue to grow. We have the potential, we have got the infrastructure, we have got the keenness of the government and the commitment of the government to support all these activities. The private sector is well versed in what needs to be done. So I think we only now need to put it together. And let's do that together. And I think your international chamber would be of immense use and importance. And the fact that you are taking a key role and a very catalytic role is something that we appreciate very much. And together, if you can take this message across to the others also, we'd like to see a lot more investors coming to Sri Lanka and taking positions with us to grow for the future. They also would be in a position to make money. Sri Lanka will benefit by that. And that's the partnership that we are seeking. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. John, before I let you go, because you are such a busy guy, it's very difficult to get all of you. Tell us what 2021 will look like for business before you sign off.
Well, the remarkable feature of 2020 has been how business has been able to rearrange and reorganize itself so quickly. If you look at supply chains, what's been absolutely remarkable has been the pure innovation and ingenuity of the private sector in redesigning, reorganizing, and reapplying their existing supply chains to meet the challenges of the pandemic. The challenges to supply chains were not the inadequate behavior of the private sector. The challenges to supply chains, which actually feed the world and enable the world to move, have been the discordant and irregular actions of governments. It's governments that caused the PPE disaster, not private sector. It's governments that caused the ventilator supply logjam, not the private sector. So looking forward to the 2021, I look forward to more ingenuity, more innovation, more resilience by the private sector. And you can be assured of one thing, that the ICC, with its voice at the UN, at all the Bretton Woods institutions, at a regional level, the practical tools we create, the institutions like our centers of entrepreneurship, we will be there striving to create an environment where the private sector can do what it does best, which is enable peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all. And we look forward to more ingenuity, more innovation, and more success. And we will be looking to do what we can to save those businesses that are under stress and give them the support they need, and ensure governments bring their power as well.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Minister, for spending this time with us.
Dinesh, may I just take one?
Yeah, sure.
Just to say hello to my old friend, His Excellency Riaz. He's an old friend of mine and from Bangladesh when he was here. So good luck to you too, and lovely seeing you again. Thank you, everyone. Maybe I'll sign off now, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you, John, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, as I would echo the sentiments expressed by Dinesh. Now, we have a truly international panel, and they are going to be part of this discussion to follow now. As was hinted, we have a dear friend of Sri Lanka, and that's His Excellency Riaz Hamidullah, who's currently the ambassador for Bangladesh in the Netherlands. But of course, as I said, he is a friend of Sri Lanka by virtue of his serving as High Commissioner here in Colombo not so long ago. Then we have Mr. Sanjay Mortala, who's the chairman, recently in office as chairman of the Board of Investment of Sri Lanka. Then we have Ms. Haja Alafifi, who's the chairperson of Unilever Sri Lanka. We also like to welcome, as one of the panelists, also from Bangladesh, Mr. Zahidul Amin, who is the co-founder of Light Castle Partners, located in Bangladesh. Then we have Mr. Ray Ren, who is the Chief Executive Officer, Hambantota International Port Group. He's, of course, Chinese national, but currently in the south of Sri Lanka. Then we also would like to welcome on board as a panelist from California at the present time, Mr. Inzaf Mohideen, who is the founder of M3V Ventures, LLC. We have Mr. Mario Gonzalez, who is the managing director and partner of Boston Consulting Group, and he joins us from India. And last and certainly not least, another very dear friend of Sri Lanka, Dr. Jürgen Mohat, who is the Consul General, German Consulate General in Mumbai in India, and he too was ambassador here in Sri Lanka for a long while, and he has had a lot to do with Sri Lanka and certainly has much that he would foresee for Sri Lanka, as he has also said on several occasions. And our moderators, you already have heard Dinesh Veerakoti, but he's also joined by Ms. Aroshi Nanekara, who is the director of the Sampat Bank PLC Sri Lanka. But we start off with Dinesh.
Yeah. Thank you, Arun. Good evening, everyone. Sanjay, I'd like to start off with you. First of all, congratulations on your recent appointment as your chairman. I know you have a busload of experience in attracting investments. You work for BCG and stuff like that. What is your strategy to put Sri Lanka back on track?
I think, Dinesh, well, firstly, ICC, thanks for this opportunity and getting this esteemed panel to discuss about investment, which is, I think, is need of the hour. So if I to start with what the Honorable Minister and John Dalton talked about, they gave a little overall understanding of what needs to come together, what are the soft aspects of investment, and of course, what the international community needs to do to help countries like Sri Lanka. Now, for me, having assumed this position, of course, being at BOI for close to a year, in contrast, all the other countries that work across attracting investment, and I see Mario is also on the call. The first thing on an investment or getting a country on the map starts at the top. So I think in that sense, if you look at what the Excellency has done, I would say two notable things. When the election happened and when the cabinet was ministers' portfolios were allocated, he kept BOI and actually elevated BOI and said this is an entity that provides direction to the entire economy and he kept it under His Excellency directly. So thereby allowing BOI to orchestrate the fabric of the economy. So that means making sure there's inclusive growth and also making sure there's catalytic investments that happens in the country to bring and propel the economy. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is about appointing a cabinet subcommittee. Now, this is something we never had in the past. Chaired by the president, convener being the BOI, any investment related issue is to be discussed and cleared up in that situation. It's not about bottlenecks, it's about policy. So we talked about a lot about the soft things, about the law, ease of doing business, right? And all of these aspects is to be taken care of in that particular forum, which I think we never had. So I think two big changes in terms of policy point of view, in terms of direction point of view, in terms of signaling point of view to the market. Then I think the next part of it is, how does the government lay out their first budget and what is the direction it gives? So the first thing that is articulated is, well, there will be a policy consistency when it comes to tax regimes, and when it looks at the trust industries, there will be 5-year policy consistency, something that we never had in the past, right? And that also signals that, look, the country is ready for the investment point of view. So all these three things puts us in terms of how we get going. Now, the next question comes in terms of what do we need to do? So there are multiple aspects. One is, firstly, there should be a interesting pipeline of investments one can invest in. So let's start with Port City. I know that Vinny Gray and the team will talk about it, but if you look at the Port City as an investment opportunity, that's at least $15 to $20 billion worth of investment. If you look at the Greater Colombo remodernization, that's another at least $10, $15 billion worth of investments. If you look at us being at $4,000 per capita GDP, going at about 6,000 to 8,000, that means a whole consumption boom is going to come in, along with e-commerce and all the consumption-related aspects. That's another few $1 billion worth of investment. If you look at the power and energy segment, $2 to $3 billion worth of investment needs to come in, because we add 1.5 to 2 gigawatts in the next 5 to 10 years, and the whole process of making Sri Lanka sustainable and 70% of electricity to come from renewable sources. We're looking at taking tourism from 2.5 million people, of course, after post-COVID and once things settle, to about 10 million arrivals. Our infrastructure is not there. So that means whatever we have today, we're going to triple it to accommodate the tourism requirement. So if you think about the investment opportunity point of view in the next 5 years, it's not something that we had seen in the past in terms of historical point of view. On top of that, add infrastructure, right? The road networks, the rail networks that needs to come in. So in terms of investment return point of view, there won't be any better time in the next 5 years. So important thing is to get the policies, important thing is to get the right strategies, right sectors, and creating an investment conducive environment. So I think that's what BOI and the government together we are trying to do, and I think that's why compared to many other years, we see a much more alignment on stars, whether it is the government policy, the direction from the top, the budget, the ministry levels, and also the other agencies that needs to play part. So let me just pause there, Dinesh.
Yeah. Sanjay, given that most of the countries have tightened their pockets, how do you sell this story to the world?
I think, Dinesh, that's true. I think if you look at what John mentioned, the total FDI pool we expect to drop about 40%. Now the question is, while that's going to happen, there will be certain amount of supply chain realignment that needs to happen, create resistance and resilience. And I think one thing that COVID taught us was that, John mentioned that if the governments are out, then maybe the ingenuity and the flexibility would have been much better. But still, there are a lot of companies who are looking at making their supply chains much more flexible. And take an example of why we are building pharmaceuticals. Because countries realize that, look, India and China account for 70% of the APIs, and it's too concentrated. In case if another pandemic or some situation happens, you probably need to have a diversified location to be able to serve from. So Sri Lanka naturally came in because of our geographical advantage, and so on and so forth. A company that came into Sri Lanka and looking to hire after 3,000 people, potentially after 10,000, like HCL, They said, look, we need to really diversify our service offering and how we provide our service and not have it in one country. So the supply chain de-risking that's going to happen will still provide the opportunity. Right, the other investments that need to happen, those are coming from private sector. If someone will come and invest in the renewables or the power sector, those are private investments. As long as there's attractive returns that we can generate, I think the returns from Sri Lanka is much more attractive than many other countries. It's a livable place. So in that sense, I would say I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah, Sanjay, now we have the Unilever chairperson also on this panel. I'm also on the board of GSK. I've been on the board of GSK for about 20 years. How come the government never really goes after the guys who are already invested here to invest more?
Dinesh, both of them are there. I would not say no. So if you look at like the investment strategy that the BOI put down, firstly, I think more than anything else, it's to take deep bottleneck. I would say create a conducive investment climate is the first thing that is required, right? So that is the market environment, that is the law of the land, right? Enforcing of the regulatory frameworks and all the enabling factors, which is the market access, right? The IPS, the bilateral agreements and all that. And then you need to have compelling segments and sectors which existing or new investors can look at it. The third part of it is you're absolutely right. It's the existing investors who would be encouraged to continue to invest. And if you look at, I'll take a good example, and Ajay could speak about how they have expanded their footprint in Sri Lanka as well. One of the largest investors we have is Michelin, which we have invested 1.4 billion, and they have continued to invest. And if you look at today, this year, we talked about how much FDI actually came in, but what we didn't talk about is how many agreements we have secured. That means the future pipeline. So we have secured close to about 2 billion. This is not even accounting the Port City $1 billion that the minister talked about, right? On the accounting for partnerships. But most of these investments that came in was reinvestments. So that's noteworthy. Even during the crisis, most of the investment that 2 billion we secured are actually reinvestments. Whether it's tire companies, glove companies, whether it's apparel companies who are investing, or whether it is technology companies who are expanding their the footprint. So you're absolutely right, Dinesh. It's something that we need to be focusing more on, but they do play a huge role in terms of FDI targets.
Thank you. Haja, can I turn to you? What is your response to that question? Are we doing enough to get more out of the existing MNCs in the country?
Thank you, Dinesh. First of all, let me say super panel, and I look forward to some concrete actions. I think you have nailed it through the question you've asked, Dinesh. But let me pause and just give a reflection about Unilever. We entered Sri Lanka no less than 82 years ago. So it's been, so I don't see myself as a multinational anymore. I see myself as, a Sri Lankan. We employ 950 employees who are paid in rupee, who are here. We have brands that are, bigger than Life, say, like really Lifebuoy, Sunlight, etc. Actually, just before I go to address your question, I think one fundamental thing that I believe is important, and the BOI, but all of us can play a role in, is to ensure that whether you're an NMC, whether you're a local, whether you're an SME, that you have a fair treatment and an equality. Because of course, when someone wants to invest into the country, they see, first of all, how are the businesses out there faring? So Unilever, we enjoy a great position with our consumers. We're one of the largest FMCGs in the country. And of course, if someone wants to enter retail or a competitor would like to be established here, they would first look up a company like Unilever with long policies, with big standards around the world. How are they faring? So it's absolutely critical that we work forward, and what we reach is exactly what we do in our market. To be fair, I think we have had fair success in the country. So we have been truly supported, and that has helped us to invest, Dinesh. So actually the ease of doing business up until I think before COVID and before the Easter attack, I think we have enjoyed our fair of success. We have doubled the size of the company. Actually, we have moved our office or our factory from Grand Pass to the Horana zone. So we are part of the BOI as one of their companies. And we even have built another factory in Agropatana, which only does export for tea. This year, we've since you spoke about JSK, we put a small investment to append Vivan Horlicks to our arsenal. So, you know, it's a give and take. You can't ask if you don't invest, and you cannot give if you do not see your partner willing. Now, if I may, I think reflect on your second, maybe not direct, but indirect question. What the government can do more for the private sector. So if you ask me, one thing that really occupies my mind is the currency stability. Because when a business wants to get established in Sri Lanka, they look at the importance of making profit, because that cash flow will allow them to, in turn, invest. But if your cash flow in rupee means a lot and in dollar doesn't mean much, then you really, the equation is quickly not done. So I do look for, you know, more stability around the currency. Number two, the access for raw material. So if I put COVID to the side, I think the importance of having raw material that is flowing into the supply chain, because otherwise you're not a credible partner and you will soon shut your business. So this year we did suffer from many issues to that regard, also port congestion, etc. I think his honorable minister spoke about them. But let me pause at one point, which I believe is critical: policies. So even if you assume the currency could be unstable, even if you assume that raw material would be in shortage in all countries given the circumstances, the importance of laws, regulations, policies that are stable and that are fair between all partners, be it local, be it global, is for me essential. Because otherwise, we are creating our own divide, and the businessman understands straight that he will not be fairly treated in the country. So I do look to how can we, with the BOI, create an atmosphere where all the investors feel cherished. I mean, we enjoy 82 years, so we are already there. But I think there is absolutely room for us. Specifically this year, we have seen, many internal debates around the country as to no, NMC, local, etc. This is unnecessary debate. What we should be looking at is who serves the consumer, how can we serve the countrymen at the end, that's the objective of everyone, and how can we progress the economy. So I'll leave it there, Dinesh.
Thank you. Just a quick question before I move on to Ren. You have worked in the region. How do you compare Sri Lanka with some of the other countries you have worked in? Haja, this question is to you.
So am I on mute? Because So I worked, I worked in London, I worked in the Netherlands, in South Africa, in Morocco. My dad is from Jordan. I have 3 nationalities, and I do therefore see myself, I do not see the divide between cultures because of the background I come from, Dinesh. And I think comparable to the other markets, I do enjoy doing business here. I do feel, one thing that the businessman looks at is long-term sustainable growth. And if you really take, a look at the 20 years, if you take out, wartime, you take out Easter attacks, you take out COVID, you do see that this country has a lot to offer. Yeah, number one. Now, I worked in Europe markets where the markets are saturated and it's tough to make growth. Whereas here, I see there is a clear potential for that GDP to move. Of course, I'll take out 2020 -5, forget it. But I think we do have a clear indication that this country has been in the region of 5-7, and it's a small country, it's an island. So we should not compare ourselves to the Bangladesh and Pakistan that soon. We should look at the remit of the country. There's a lot to offer. Now, I think versus the other countries, which is really the big question you asked. Look at the Netherlands. The Netherlands, where I spent 5 enjoyable years of my life, they're the second exporter in the world in terms of horticulture and agriculture. There only are 16 million people, less than the population here in the Netherlands. So what have they done to allow this? Look at the country from where I come, Morocco. They quickly identified the geographical position they're in, and they have created a port which now prides itself in being one of the best offshore zones in the region. And I think this comes through really selecting, I think Sanjay, you said it's really selecting the sectors, betting for the long term. So I see that there is, there are discrepancies. FDI is low in Sri Lanka. We now rank, I think, number 90 out of 190, and we want to be in the top 70. There is possibility to get there, but we need to work on it for a long term. I don't think it will happen over a year. It has to be a long term. And this type of debate, Dinesh, helps it. Because at the end, one thing that is still missing, which I'd like to point out, is forums like this, where private sector sits together with the government. And I mean by private sector, this type of forum where there's an international board that is able to guide and advise as well the government as to how to move forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Sanjay, I think you should use her as one of your brand ambassadors.
Absolutely.
Ren, can I move to you? Ren, can you hear me? Ren, can you hear us?
Yeah, I hope not.
Yeah, okay. You when I asked around whom should I invite from the Chinese community, so many people mentioned your name, that you're the best guy to put on this panel. Share with us some experience about Sri Lanka and what are your plans for the future?
Yes, I take myself as Sri Lanka as well. I've been living here for almost 12 years. So as you may know, we as China Merchants, we have invested two big projects in Sri Lanka. One's in Colombo, another is in Hambantota. The total investment is over $2 billion US. So for us, I'm fully in agreement with what I just mentioned. As an investor, we are looking at long-term return from the project. We are not coming to be a short-term business and go. In past 3 years after I shifted to Hambantota, I just wanted to share a case with you, since we are talking about how and in which way we should attract foreign direct investment. So in past 3 years, we have been putting so much efforts in attracting foreign direct investment into the port industry zones. So we have been talking to the investors from Southeast Asian countries. We have been talking to the investors from Chinese manufacturer sectors, and of course we got a very positive response from many of them, and they've been here and they did their market survey, and we also reviewed a lot of obstacles when they started the market survey. They find the difficulties. The first, the supply chain Sri Lanka is not that advanced. So when we see, like, if we wanted to attract a manufacturer to relocate their factory into Sri Lanka, the first issue to them is how they can manage their vendors, how they can manage their supply chains. That is also the subject of today's seminar. So then after that all, we changed our strategy, and we thought it's better if we can convince at least one or two big investors who can bring a cluster of industry into the country. Then they have their leverage power in their market, in their industry. They can bring their upstream, their downstream vendors jointly with them. So that is what we did for this, as just mentioned by Sanjay, the 300 million investment for the Thai factory. So that we find an anchor project. So they are capable to bring others. They will complete their supply chain by themselves. That is I think the thing we should look at. Another thing is about, I'm talking about a big port business. So everyone knows Hambantota handle many vehicles. I just asked by everyone to change the angle of my camera, because it was facing the window. I really wanted to show you what is outside of my window. Thousands of vehicles are there. We handle almost 40,000 vehicles per month. 90% of the vehicles are from India, but only less than 2% of vehicles are for Sri Lanka market. So that is obvious things like the manufacturers are not looking at Sri Lanka market. What we did for them is to make Hambantota, or we can also expand this concept to make Sri Lanka as the distribution center for the manufacturers. So now the vehicles are parking in Hambantota. They were manufactured by the automobile companies like Hyundai, Toyota, Suzuki, Ford. There are different brands of vehicles manufactured in India, and they send to Hambantota as transshipment cargo. But this transshipment cargo is not typical transshipment where like the shipper and consignees, they know each other. It's only for the connection. But here, it's more like a distribution. So vehicles become the manufacturers.
Ren, can I interrupt here in the interest of time to ask you another quick question? This on a lighter vein, I'm not asking you whether the investment was viable or not, right? But tell me what more investment is in the pipeline and how can we get more Chinese investors to invest in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking. Because of the vehicles, for example, it's like, why I mention this is just to give another thought to everyone. Yeah. Because those manufacturers, they are not targeting Sri Lanka markets. So what we want, what we need to do is to take advantage of our location. So people are talking about the location of Sri Lanka, but in particular, what in extra we can do for the investors? That is the question I'm also always asking myself. So vehicle manufacturers, they use Hambantota for distribution, so that they can cover their, because of the connectivities here, like no matter Port of Colombo or Hambantota, they can connect to their target markets like in Africa, even in South America, they use Hambantota for the distribution. So that is something we are doing here. And what we are doing is to attract the investors coming in, use Hambantota to complete their global supply chain. That
fantastic.
For the tire factory is the typical case, and there may be more others. So that is I'm just giving another like a thought for everyone. Well, of course, like Unilever is for mainly for the domestic market, but many of other investors, they may focus on other markets as well. So that is what I'm thinking, and that is what we are doing at the moment. Yeah.
Ren, what are your frustrations operating in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, of course, you see, like even this year is a very difficult year to all the investors, to everyone. But we have been successfully locked in this 300 million investment. So I think that gives a lot of confidence to the market, to the international market, that Sri Lanka is capable to receive, to attract more investment. But of course, we have been in difficult times, especially for ease of doing business. I think that is something we need to do jointly with the government. BOI is very supportive, but let's take an example, like for an investor to settle down their business in Sri Lanka, it normally will take at least 3 months, or maybe sometimes 6 months. So if we are competing with other neighboring countries, I'm sure like the businessmen go to Vietnam, go to Laos, Cambodia, they will take a shorter time to get their business settled down in those countries. So I think that is the most important thing, is the ease of doing business. Second thing is that we need to really enhance the electricity power supply. That is also the key factor if we are going to attract more manufacturers to Sri Lanka. That's
Thank you.
I think
Thank you very much. I'm sure Sanjay will fix that problem very soon.
In the process.
In the process.
Yeah. Okay. Riaz, can you hear us? Riaz?
Yeah.
Hi. Welcome,
Yeah.
Mr. Ambassador. This is nice to talk to you after a long time.
Yeah.
A huge problem the private sector has is that they feel that the ambassadors sitting outside Sri Lanka are not doing enough for the private sector to promote their products and services, right? Talk a little bit about how the embassies can actually plug into some of these networks and promote Sri Lankan products and services. I know you were doing that a lot for Bangladesh.
That's a different call. That's a tough call. To be very honest, I think it takes two to tango, because I'll be very frank. Even though I know that it's going out pretty wide, sometimes for any ambassador or diplomat, I mean, when you asked to carry the mantle of trade promotion, investment mobilization, FDI to be more particular, there is also necessity and requirement for the private sector to appreciate the kind of space where we work. And I say this absolutely candidly. It may be a little cryptic, but I hope the eminent panelists would appreciate. Now, I'll connect with you maybe with something that I'm trying to do in building on my experience in Sri Lanka. And I pick up the point from Hazar of Unilever and connecting with Sri Lanka, Netherlands, and Bangladesh. And this is my pitch where, remember in the fireside chat 2 years back, you were there in Hilton. And when you asked me that what is for the Sri Lanka, I'll connect with that. If you ask me, I've met the mayor of Rotterdam, and he's quite a fiery character. He asked me that don't look at the way you are structuring your supply chains in Bangladesh, and don't go the Chinese way. I know Ray is there. What did he mean? He said that the way the commodities and the merchandise goods-based supply chain is there, it may not be there in long time. So Netherlands, for example, when you say, look at Netherlands, a country where you don't have the open air cultivation, what they're going here, the last year agri exports mounted to $105 billion. You check out the facts and how did that come possible? When I look at Sri Lanka, I think that's absolutely eminently possible, not only for production and manufacturing, and then moving beyond, more from distribution. So that's where I connect Ray, but on different things. Now, if you ask the embassies, I think basically what one of the things we can really do is to just remain, I mean, as the Americans say, hang on. I mean, just remain engaged with the investors. Practically, the problem is that I or you or no one for that matter would know who is a potential investor. So anyone and everyone you come across who you may think, I mean, has something worth of, that's how I connected with you, for example, just to approach, go out, in a cafe or elsewhere, and then pick up, let me listen to you, and also listen to the existing investors. That's very key. So I take that point that, sometimes that we're missing. I give an example. In 10 years' time, both in case of Chinese and Japanese investors in Bangladesh, it has tripled. Now, one of the things we realize is that because of those who are on the ground, because of the word of mouth or confidence and trust and comfort, the words going out, they come. It will not come because of you and me. It has to come with the starting point with them. My second point is, which realization I'll make a very strong pitch, is that, I mean, what kind of FDI are we really looking at? 20 years back, when I started my career, it was said that, look at the sunset industries. Today, we are talking about sunrise industries. But my take is that I'm not interested, and frankly, I'm not making my pitch with the big MNCs. I'm making my pitch with the innovators, SMEs. Europe, you have 2.4 million SMEs. Netherlands is flush with SMEs. So I'm not trying to reach out to them, knowledge incubators, and say that, can you really plug into Bangladesh, and not Bangladesh per se? It's Bangladesh and South Asia wider. Remember Lasna Flora? Do you know what Lasna Flora is doing? Lasna is bringing bulbs from Netherlands to Sri Lanka. Now he's also looking at Bangladesh. So what I see is that it's again very interesting way of carving supply chain. So he's looking at Bangladesh, Netherlands, and Sri Lanka together. So I don't have to, I'm bringing these examples essentially to underscore. It's a space and road where you cannot have the knowns. It's mostly fraught with unknowables. So one will have to work, and sometimes the systems is both private sector and public sector, including people like your kind. When I look at Sanjay, I mean, they need a little to appreciate the, animals or creatures like us when we walk. It's very, because investment mobilization is a long thing. I engage with BOI. Sometimes, if you say that, okay, how many investments have you mobilized? Let me tell you something. Last week, Zahid is here with Light Castle, and we have a partner in Lariv in Amsterdam. We had 3 webinars. We didn't go the typical investment seminar way. What we said, let's get the Dutch, and we looked at 3 specific sectors: agro-food, light engineering, water and maritime. All absolutely 90 minutes, very specific. So I think the way we structure, we look at investment mobilization or FDI strategies. Please excuse me, I may not be agreeing on that, the way it's fraught. It's very dynamic. One investor, so to say, or MNCs would move. It's a different completely preference and they move. But let's look at these smaller ones, because because it's all about supply chain. If they come and plug in Sri Lanka, for example, the others will kind of make a beeline gradually. So that's where I'm trying to pick up from Ray's point as also Sanjay's point. That's my pitch.
Okay. So are you saying that we should not go after the big multinationals? We should start focusing on the smaller SMEs?
Yeah. I would very strongly say that. Why? Because that's what if you say of our experience in Bangladesh, as also in Netherlands, that's the thing. Netherlands, I'm sure later you can have conversation with Unilever, because she has been in Netherlands 5 years. But when I come from Sri Lanka 4 years, there are 400 million close to 400 million Sri Lankan investments in Bangladesh. That's something we know. That's what we are familiar with. Coming to Netherlands, I realized that, Europe is a different ball game. You cannot go and who are the MNCs, for example? You can't reach them. They're not interested in you, for example, not interested in me as a Bangladesh ambassador. So if I rather get the SMEs, what we are making a pitch is that, for example, that the Dutch SMEs, innovators, technologists, they need to sell their solutions. Now, here in Bangladesh, we have the market beyond Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan combined, much wider. So that's where there's a win-win. So one has to sell the win-win. One has to carve where is the mutuality of interests. So once that's there, now I see, in spite of COVID, there's a surging interest. So that's my pitch.
Okay. You didn't really answer my question about skills and competencies of ambassadors to promote.
You're putting me to spot. I don't know how to respond best, but very difficult. I think, first of all, it won't come simply as a matter of imparting training. It ought to come in terms of a person's having interest, go for the kill. If that is not their investment mobilization or engaging in conversations with you, Sanjay, Hazar, is a difficult thing. I have to not only has to have a reasonable amount of understanding, but also interest. So when I talk to an Eindhoven person dealing with technology, I don't know anything, zilch. But if I remain engaged with him, even ask the very basics, I know that I can sail through. But if the person knows that I'm not sincere, even if I may not know anything, he would not engage with me. So not only family and knowledge, but more than knowledge, or as much as more knowledge, my sincerity I have to demonstrate, put on the table. And I fully take that it's a long haul. So if today I engage with you and then 6 months I don't remain engaged with you, I had been with Ray, for example, off and on, then Ray would not pick up a phone, for example, next time. I don't know how best to respond to you.
Okay. Mario, can I move on to you? You are a strategy guy. We are used to the 4 Ps, the ENSOF, right? You heard a lot of stuff being said. Can you put it into some context now?
Sure, Dinesh. First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in this. And I would probably like to just broaden what you would call BCG, Dinesh. We are no longer just a strategy firm. I think we do the end-to-end in terms of course, a strategy, but then also driving value and implementation. Also, just briefly to cover what we do, we are right now 90 offices across 50 countries. So investment facilitation, actually, we've done about 45 projects across different countries. So understand the space very well. I think, Dinesh, before I come to your question, just 1 or 2 things I want to put into perspective. Number one is, while we had discussed that FDI flows are getting impacted and are expected to drop by 40%. If you think about it, we are talking about a base of 2 trillion. And if this even dropped by 40%, we still have upwards of 1 trillion FDI to target, a huge pool. The second point is, there are always questions about, is this real in terms of supply chains restructuring or not, or is this something we're just hearing in the news? I can confirm to you, because I'm part of 2 current projects we are running on investment attraction. There is huge interest for investors to move. Personally, in India, we are seeing a pipeline of upwards of 50 billion at a national level, and close to 4-5 billion just for one state in India that we are working with. So this is real. Now, coming to your question, Dinesh, about how do you think about all of this and what should we hence do to attract our share of investment? I'd mentioned this in another panel I was also part of earlier this week. As we look at the entire investor base that we have, it's first of all important to understand what are these investors looking for. And hence, where does Sri Lanka have the proposition that will attract investment? We've seen broadly 3 categories of investors. There are factor cost driven investors, there are ecosystem and resource driven investors, and there are demand driven investors. Now, sadly, Sri Lanka will not be able to attract the third category of demand driven investors, given the sort of local demand is relatively small. But there is huge opportunity in the first 2. If I look at factor cost driven investors, and a key example being the electronics segment. And secondly, if we look at ecosystem and resource driven investors, which again, an example is pharma or auto and auto components. So my view would be that to attract these 2 segments, there are some table stakes that need to be addressed. And we've spoken about many of those, and I should congratulate Sanjay and the board of investment for putting many of these in place. You need to have stable policy and policy continuity. You need to assure investors of ease of doing business and a single window to connect with. I think these are table stakes irrespective of who we are targeting. And then if we look at factor cost driven investors, we need to give them a proposition either in terms of performance linked incentives, capital subsidies, etc., which make it attractive from a unit economics perspective for them to come and set up here. That's exactly the discussion we are having with Pegatron, for example, a major electronics manufacturer, which is looking at 1 billion investment in India. Why can't Sri Lanka be a India plus 1 and help them to, for all of the exports they're looking at, come and set up in Sri Lanka? Similarly, if I take the ecosystem and resource driven investors, they are looking for ready build infrastructure. They're looking for private parks which give them either ready build factories or at least testing centers, R&D centers, innovation centers. Again, why isn't that something that Sri Lanka can do? Right? Put in place some of this infrastructure. And again, I should congratulate you all, because I've heard that there are 5 clusters being set up. That will help you in a big way to again attract investors. Right? So that would be if I could structure the discussion, Dinesh, there are table stakes, which it's very good to see you're putting in place. But now we need to think of the next level. And for each of these categories of investors, have a very targeted outreach, right? And give a very targeted offering, which will then bring in some of this investment. But the good news is there is a lot of activity out there, and Sri Lanka can definitely take their share of the pie. One last point, think of it as, and which is why I would slightly disagree with few of the other esteemed panelists. It's not about just one segment of investors. We have to think about the big dollars which are going to come from the MNCs, the OEMs, the anchor investors. We cannot leave that segment aside. At the same time, there are also investors, the likes of Tesla, for example, that are looking at setting up R&D centers, tech centers, innovation centers. And then there are the sunrise sectors. We need to ensure that we have a clear strategy for each of these buckets in terms of the offering. So I don't know, Dinesh, if I answered it or made it more confusing, but that's how I would encapsulate this entire investment outreach and approach.
But 2 requests. One is, if you can actually summarize our conversation today and give it to us, we can actually hand it over to the government. And secondly, my frustration is that we have been talking to George Soros, Houseman has come and put a strategy, Michael Porter was engaged, but still we are below $1 billion. Right? So to me, is it an execution problem that we are having, or is it a strategy problem we are having?
Dinesh, so, and I'm sure Sanjay will add on to it. One part is the strategy, and you do need to have a strategy to have clarity on where to focus. Right? Because you cannot have this, machine gun approach of reaching out to every investor. Our experience has been cold calling gives you not more than a 5 to 10% response. And hence you need to be clear about where you're going to reach out and how you're going to reach out. But the devil is in the details, Dinesh. I can tell you, beyond the first set of outreaches that we have done and the first set of conversations, the project I'm driving right now, we have done an outreach to 600 investors. The active conversations are only with 50 of those. Within those 50, there are only 15 right now who are actually looking to ground investments in the next 6 months, each of which requires a site visit, each of which requires detailed economics around how this will be better for them versus a Vietnam or a China or any other destination. They require to then understand what sort of specific incentives you're offering, and is this just your standard policy, or are you willing to give them anything extra? They want comfort that there's going to be policy continuity. These are multiple conversations. Each investment to be grounded, unless the investor is already in your country and is looking at a brownfield investment. Any new investment requires follow-up of anywhere from 6 months to a year. So yes, strategy is important, which gives you clarity on where to focus, but the devil is in the details and in the implementation. You need the hands and legs to be able to run after these investors and help to ground the investment. It's a long process.
Thank you. Thank you. Zahid, can I turn to you? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Zahid, I think it might be interesting to engage you now in a conversation. This, I know you have done a lot of research and you've been doing a lot of writing and stuff like that. Yeah, if you prioritize, right? He talked about incentives and all. I've heard people saying incentives don't really matter, right? What is your research telling you?
Yeah, Dinesh, to be honest, incentive is something which is more like a hygiene factor. If I may say what investment is like, it's like a love marriage, right? So you cannot push an investor to come to a country. It's not something that can be done in a very short time, right? So what happens is you need to inform the investor, and it has to be a very gradual process where the investor will start loving the country. And we have been in touch with a lot of international investors who have already invested in Bangladesh. And one common thing that we see is that they like the country and they like the people. And many of them end up reinvesting in the country. Of course, the fundamentals are there. If I could very shortly say about Bangladesh's economy in general, the economy has been growing, but the per capita GDP for the first time has crossed that of India's. Our economy is larger than that of Pakistan right now. And in general, we are at upward momentum. We have a very large population of 160 million people. The population density is 1,200 plus, which is probably one of the highest in the world. Alongside, apart from the population part, we also have a very large working population, and the average age of the population is roughly 26.5 years. So considering that these are like core fundamental factors or macroeconomic variables which are influencing further investments, the incentives are there. I personally believe that our government's incentives are quite robust, but this is something that can be replicated across the board. But what we feel is that Bangladesh is at a juncture where probably China was. It's not a good comparison, to be honest. It's not an apple-to-apple comparison. But if you look at the fundamental economic numbers, this is where China was more or less 25 years back. And that is the pitch that we give to the potential investor whom we talk to on a regular basis. We tell them that Bangladesh is at a critical juncture. It is at an inflection point, and this is a great opportunity to enter the country. Or if you don't do that, you're going to miss the bandwagon. I guess I could answer your question, but incentives are important, but I believe that those are just the hygiene factor.
Yeah. Also, there's a lot of good FDI coming out of Zahid. There's a lot of good FDI coming out of India and China, though people grumble. How do we plug into that?
Yeah, Anna, that's a great question. I think this is a once in a lifetime opportunity because given the pandemic and given the fact that due to the US-China trade, where a lot of Western economies, particularly Chinese, Southeast Asian companies are looking to diversify their sources. And unfortunately, Bangladesh hasn't been able to fully capitalize on it, particularly due to the nation branding factor. The government is working on that, but there is a lot of room for improvement. But the first thing I would say is, apart from the basic fundamentals and the policies, would be the overall perception of the country in front of potential investors. We have to be known for the right things. Unfortunately, Bangladesh's ease of doing business ranking is 168, which is quite low. Despite that, we have gotten FDI of roughly $3 billion last year. And this year, over the first 6 months, the FDI inflow was 1 billion, which is, to be honest, not good. There is a lot of opportunities, but I would say the first thing would be to sort of find ways to alter the perception of Bangladesh as a destination. Another thing that's happening here, quite interestingly, is Bangladesh is an LDC, least developed country, and Bangladesh is for the first time has graduated as a lower middle income nation, and it's going to the graduation is going to get permanent in the year 2024. So I think this will give further impetus to Bangladesh's potential wherewithal to attract more investment from the international market.
Thank you. Sanjay, can I talk this hit about nation branding? Tell us what we are doing from Sri Lankan standpoint.
I think, Dinesh, maybe there was one other question that I would touch on. I think there were many strategies that were developed. I think when I reflect back on those strategies, what was lacking was the futuristic approach. If you want to build billion-dollar verticals for the future, you need to start somewhere. And I don't think that was there. And the second part I think we were always lacking is the execution. The question that you asked just now, sorry, Dinesh, can you repeat again? Oh, the
nation branding, yeah.
If you think about a country, there are 4 entities or 5 entities that matters, right? Central bank, your treasury, whichever the form it is, your Securities and Exchange Commission, and then the BOI. So those 4 entities need to come in properly to brand the country, because BOI can't, right, unless you have a SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, putting the law and the regulation around investment liquidation, and exit opportunities. You really can't get investments where you don't have an exit. BOI can't really talk about the policies unless the Treasury sets the policies and some of the legal frameworks which central bank also needs to play a role. Because all these four entities, if they come together, then the country branding will work in unison. And I think that's what I am trying to move with the SEC, central bank, and the Treasury. And you're seeing some steps happening, but we have not moved fast enough, right? And the last element, which I didn't really talk about, sorry, I missed out, was entities like ICC, the Chamber of Commerce, the Foreign Service, both the embassies here, as well as our embassies in the country. So they all, if we work together, the branding will develop. And yes, so Sri Lanka, like in the tourism back in the day, we were unknown land to be discovered. But if you think about investment point of view, it is the same. If you look at the underlying infrastructure, underlying soft assets, we have much more compared to multiple other countries. But the ecosystem of 1,200 companies, which we are in here, 1,200 companies who have invested in Sri Lanka from foreign nations, which we don't talk about. And many people, and what Mario talked about, the ecosystem investors are completely blindsided. They don't know what the ecosystem is here for them to come and plug and play. And I was talking to one large investor, and I didn't know that their ecosystem was actually here. And when I went back and looked at it, and we were like, oh, these companies are here. So then the second discussion was, why did they come here? So I think on the country brand point of view, it's not just ease of doing business, which gives you the branding. It's not the financial stability that gives it, but it's also like a one-stop shop and really helping on execution, holding hand, and what Ray talked about, getting the investors, once they come in, to establish within 3 months. I think that's the best country branding you can have. And I believe the investors will talk about Sri Lanka, and that's the best branding we can have.
Okay. Before I move to Insof, I have a quick question for you here. Somebody wants to know how you plan to transform the BOI into an EDB or a MIDA, that's the investment arm in Malaysia, or the IDA in Ireland.
All long journeys start with small steps. So I think the first is to get I would say there are 4 elements, right? One is getting the right people and empowering them to do what needs to be done. Secondly, you need to get the policy, the transparency, the digital to enable things and get things done in a quick manner. Then the last part of it is the country transformation. So if these 3 can be done, then we can move Sri Lanka or BOI in that direction. Now, EDBs were not built overnight. It's an entity that has been in existence for more than 30, 40 years. But at the end of the day, as the panel talked about, we are not trying to be the best government organization in this country. We are trying to be or better than Invest India or a US Bangladesh, with all respect, or a Thailand or a Malaysia, because we need to be able to hold us, right, meaning to be shoulder to shoulder and really promote the country. So in the BOI transformation, that is my key objective. That will come with multiple steps. A lot of private partnerships would be required, and Dinesh and everyone on the call, anyone who could lend resources or lend their bandwidth is most welcome. And it's a long journey, but all journeys start with small steps.
Okay. This in terms of any targets for 2021?
Dinesh, in terms of FDIs, you're talking about?
Yeah.
I think I think our focus always has been FDI in terms of realized FDI, because that's what goes on the central bank numbers. But for me, that is, I think, secondary, because 80% or 90% of the FDI on a given country is the health. It's stuff that we have already signed. So for me, what's most important is to keep a healthy pipeline. So we managed to secure close to about $1.8 billion plus another 700 million if you take the port city as well into account. I'm looking at least getting close to 2 billion or more into the pipeline. And some of them inked. Hopefully, these are all inked deals, right? Ideally, another billion or billion and a half, which will probably continue, because some of these discussions that Mario talked about are multi-year discussions. So if I can have a 2 billion inked, about another 1.5 billion in the pipeline, I think that's a good start for the next year, because it's a year that it's going to be partially coming out of COVID, partially transitioning with multiple political things that's happening in the world. So I would say that's a good start.
Okay. Insaf, can I turn to you? It's early morning in the US, right? Thank you very much for joining. First of all, before I start talking about FDI, what would Biden look like for South Asia?
I think overall, any U.S. presidential change, you'll see some level of policy changes. Obviously, with Biden, I think there would be more favorable conditions, as well as there would be, they'd probably take a harder stand on human rights, etc. Some of those headaches will probably linger back up. Yeah. But in terms of economic diplomacy, I think it opens up quite a few avenues. We're already seeing that impact. I work with 3 of the largest sovereign funds in the world, and in terms of policy statements, etc., we're already seeing very favorable policy statements, and definitely an easing of the whole U.S.-China tensions. That's something that we look forward to.
So there will be more openness for trade then?
Oh, absolutely. I don't necessarily think there was an unwillingness to, invest or trade. If you look at FDI outflows from the US or inflows up until 2017, globally there was a peak, and then, it followed the trends. But just in terms of, I primarily work in the finance and fintech, as well as the technology segments, and those segments have historically made massive investments, both internally and externally. And if I were to sum up what was discussed out here, some of what we would probably like to see from, at least from where I'm at, Silicon Valley, New York investment community, is the articulation of what it is Sri Lanka has to offer, right? So if you look at it, even the Honorable Ambassador mentioned it, economic diplomacy is a challenging one when especially when you're a country like Sri Lanka and you come over to the US, or even some segments of the other countries I work with. It's not necessarily known for anything outside of, let's say, infrastructure or manufacturing or local retail consumption, right? But I think the bigger opportunity, especially because we're bringing in about 1 to 2 billion, if we want to take it down that 10 billion roadmap. A primary example I'd love to use is Ireland, right? So if you look at how they've made that transformation, how Vietnam's made that transformation, primarily focusing on the service segment, whether it be finance or technology, and that started with very small steps. Going after the multinationals, great approach, but most multinationals, once you get past those hygiene factors, as Riaz mentioned, they're going to want to know success stories. How has it panned out? How has it worked out? Let's say, for instance, if you go and pitch to Google, when Ireland pitched to Google, that was the same conversation. What are the structural elements? That's awesome. Tax incentives, almost any even any state in the US would be willing to give Google a tax incentive, right, or tax break. So beyond those factors, what makes Sri Lanka special, and what are the successes that other some smaller companies or small, medium-sized companies have had, right? That's the story we are not hearing. I certainly think, given the current budget cycle, current leadership in the BOI, et cetera, there is that willingness and that long-term outlook of a strategy, because the conversation of, what is FDI going to be next year, I think that's already slated, done and dusted. If at most you might be able to get a 10-15% increase, but you're not going to move the needle massively, right? But 3 to 5 years out, absolutely. So, country branding, I think, is going to be massive, especially once you start getting outside of the, Southeast Asian market segment, et cetera. And that's where I'd be interested to see, what is the BOI plan in terms of the branding approach, as well as, when I look at, the Honorable Minister Nawad Cabral, he actually mentioned, as well as, Sanjay mentioned, we're going after a wide variety, right? So everything from agriculture to education to tech, infrastructure, that's a wide pool. So do we have the resources to be able to market, brand, and, go after? So even like Mario mentioned, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, right? So sitting on this side of the FDI pool, we get probably about 1,000 calls a year from hedge funds, from facilitators, from countries, from ambassadors, and then we probably will make 5 investments. So it's less than 0.05%. So you have to have a compelling story. So even if an ambassador reaches out, their story on economic diplomacy, their story on what the success factors have to be very articulate. And unfortunately, just given the segment that I'm in, we haven't seen that come in a succinct fashion from Sri Lanka. And
okay. Okay. This you have a very interesting profile, plus you run a huge sovereign wealth fund. What is your experience so far working with Sri Lanka?
So for unfortunately, I haven't had much experience working in Sri Lanka outside of some level of engagement over the past couple of years. I am setting up an office in Sri Lanka. I'm putting together a team. Would love to bring the tech segment, because I honestly believe that's where we can move the needle massively, right? We do have the infrastructure. We do have, the beaches. So tech employees, they can work from anywhere. They love the beaches. So for instance, Hawaii is making a huge push towards attracting tech employees. And if you can land one of those companies, and if you can land those investments and build that next unicorn, that next billion-dollar company, it not only benefits the local economy, now we are creating dollar billionaires in the economy, as well as you got an amazing success story, right? Because, once Netflix and Google decided to make the move to Ireland, boom, you had a ton of other financial segments, retail segments making that move. So I really think there has to be a very directed approach, and it's much easier to make the sell to knowledge-based service industries, because of the fact that Sri Lanka has a stable environment, has the logistical factors, English-speaking population, and the education levels.
Thank you. Thank you. On a lighter vein, before I pass on to Aroshi, as a sovereign wealth fund head, what keeps you up at night these days?
Well, we're sitting on a ton of money, right? Because we're not reinvesting. So that in and of itself creates a huge potential for countries like Sri Lanka that is looking to basically have a huge land grab over the years. And that's our biggest problem is, at this point, the visibility is not there. You can't travel. The logistical inhibitors that prevent us from reinvesting. So this past year has been an amazing year for wealth funds and the financial segments. So we're sitting on a ton of reinvestment money. So definitely looking for pitches, definitely looking for innovative ideas, how we can outperform the market.
Minister Cabral made a hard sell on capital markets. How about investing some in the markets?
So here's the issue with sovereign funds, right? So while I agree that, a downgrade does not necessarily mean that there are inherent risk factors, but you look at pension funds, sovereign funds, we're the most conservative, right? So when you take a downgrade, that's the hit you take. So you're still able to attract investment, but not from the same types of investors. because you're ultimately investing a country's money or a stakeholders' money who are highly conservative. So it's harder to basically bring in sovereign fund money. It's harder to bring in the pension fund money when you have a downgrade. I mean, it's just a regulatory issue, right? So that would be the challenge for us.
Thank you. Over to you, Aroshi.
Thanks, Dinesh. Am I on? Yes, on. Okay. Right. So we are looking at a few questions that have come in, and I'm going to start off with a question to Mario, and that is, John mentioned that there's been a 40% drop in FDIs given the COVID scenario, which has impacted dramatically, primarily the lower economic zones kind of thing. What new trends will we witness in FDIs post-COVID?
Thanks, Arushi. So I'd mentioned this when I spoke as well earlier. There's a 40% drop, but with that 40% drop, there's still a significant pool out there. And I think we are seeing a few shifts though because of COVID and post-COVID. Number one is that companies are no longer wanting to have all the eggs in one basket. And hence the shift out of China is real. And hence many companies are looking for the second location, which can be a good export location for them. And which is where I think Sri Lanka has a great role to play, because if you can provide a location that has got ready-built infrastructure, has got good skilled labor, provides facilities such as tech or R&D centers, etc., you can attract a larger number of these investors. So that's one big change we are seeing, where future supply chains are always going to have a China plus one strategy. And can Sri Lanka hence be that plus one? I think the second shift we are seeing, which is not necessarily COVID driven, is on the entire sunrise sectors. We are seeing a lot of interest and a lot of investment happening, for example, in the EV space and future mobility space. We are seeing a lot of investment happening in smart infrastructures such as data centers. There's about 4 billion worth of investment that's looking to come into India, for example, in data centers. Similarly, there's a lot of investment we are seeing in spaces such as smart manufacturing, nanomaterials, etc. So that's the second big trend I'm seeing, where there's a lot of investment coming into new tech or sunrise sectors. And hence, that's something that's also important to target. So these are two big shifts that we are seeing, Arushi, from the work we are doing.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Next question, if I can pose to Sanjay, and that is, Sri Lanka has inched up one notch in the ease of doing business from the 100th position to the 99th position in 2020. Is the government looking at a concerted, focused effort in the next 5 years, let's say, to bring it up, not by an incremental level, but by a transformative level?
Aroshi, this short answer is yes, and I'm leading that effort. So far, what the team has done is it looked at in terms of ease of doing business and all the initiatives that's going on in the country. And if we combine them in the most value accretive way, within 3 years, we can go to mid-60s or top 60, early 60s. Now, the question is, theoretically, it is possible. Now, practically, how it's getting done, I think that's when the rubber hits the road. The execution is what it comes in, right? I think the aspects about simplifying the tax structure itself will increase. Getting online, ability to pay taxes online, the VAT registration, having one unique ID for taxes. Those are some of the quick wins that will probably move the ranking. And of course, don't take me wrong, this ranking is not an isolated ranking, it's a relative ranking. So other countries are also moving. Many other countries have taken the initiatives, just like what we have done, moving the custom processes online and so on and so forth. So let's see how the dust settles, but I think what important is not where we are, but at least if the process is simplified and it's actually much better than what we start with. So using the cabinet subcommittee with the Honorable Niwat Cabral and Honorable Basil Rajapaksa, we're going to have a concerted effort to bring all the organizations together to push this forward. And that's a dialogue that's already happening.
Okay. Again, with COVID-19 has shown that technology and digital connectivity and being, having your systems up and running is utterly important. How is the government ensuring in ease of doing business as well as in attracting FDIs, that whole digitalization journey is going to get carried forward and speeded up to some extent?
In that sense, like there's one, right? Firstly, again, the intent starts from the top. All the technology related entities are brought into one ministry. And it's kept out with HG to drive it. And he's also a technology person to start with, right? And that's a prominence on the ICT segment or all the changes you're doing. And even to have the unique ID, just like what the Aadhaar card is of India. This is something that His Excellency started when he was the Defense Secretary much long ago, though it was stalled. So once you come in that, then you have the crib link to it, you have the KYC link to it, one thing, then the biometrics links to it, then you can have all the banking system and all that. Then the spur of growth you can have, and I think if you look at Bangladesh, the digital innovation and the e-governance enable and spurred a lot of startups and companies to come on top, which propel the economy as well. So I think the short answer is that bringing all the ICT agencies together and solving those systematic issues which the government needs to sense with the fundamental or the underlying architecture, and then everyone can build it and we can do the ease of doing business much faster.
Thank you. Thanks. Next question to Haja from Unilever. The internal market in Sri Lanka is only 20 million people, and it's really not large enough to attract large-scale foreign direct investment for local consumption purposes, maybe. How can we use free trade agreements with the neighboring markets as a strategy to attract FDIs?
I think the answer is already in the question. But let me reflect on the first section of the question, 20 million people, and I would add to it that demography, which is rather on the aging side of things, plus the birth rate is low. So I think this tells us that everything is connected. And one thing we also need to do is to promote the current demography for growth, because at the end you have to show that organically you can grow your market instead of just borrowing, demography from other markets. So I think, and I think China is a great example how they have put. China is one example, but France is another example which I'd like to cite here. Whereas if you have 3 kids, you start paying 50% less tax. So there was even, policies that were set by the government to entice families to have more kids and thereby generate local consumption. So that's one part of the story. I think the second part is, yes, simple, attract FDI through free trade. Now, it's easily said than done. If it was easy to have a free trade agreement with these countries, I'm sure we would have done it. And I think one area which I would like to point out, because this solution is, I believe, is a longer term solution, is to have a country that is really open for all sorts of FDI, open for all sorts of conversations, not to have one-way investment, because today we also know that the majority of the investment is coming from a specific pool of countries, because there is a little bit of protectionism that is grounding our policies and the way we do business. So when you open up your business and you put out there the need for others to come and help you, I think there you create an atmosphere for this free trade agreement to start happening. Otherwise, I think it will be a big journey. But just to summarize, I think first we need to grow our economy by boosting the birth rate. And we can boost the birth rate if the government can give families the possibility to do so.
Okay, thank you very much. One final question, as we are kind of past our time actually, to Insaf. And that is, do you see FDI, I mean, we've all been talking about how FDI has dropped particularly in 2020. Do you see developed countries, particularly say the US, following a more insular policy where they will start investing more within themselves, as a result FDI crashing further? Or do you see it, resurging back to pre-COVID levels?
I think it's a great question. Insular policy has been prevalent for about the past 3 years, right? So if you look at 2017 is where we peaked with FDI, and from 2017 right up until COVID, we gradually saw a year-over-year decline. But the interesting thing that I am seeing now during these past 8 months is there's a lot of introspection in terms of returns, in terms of diversification, in terms of where the money needs to go to. And also politically, you're seeing a lot of those nationalistic policies kind of taking a bit of a turn, for the lack of a better word. So I do expect FDI environment to basically be thriving post-COVID, so going into 2022. 2021, again, an unknown given, all the decisions that have been made. But certainly going into 2022, I think we are going to see a lot more outflows of FDI, and, getting ready at this point and putting a game plan together, certainly a good approach.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. I think we've come to the end of our time slot. So I pass the baton back to Arun. Thank you.
Thanks, Aroshi. Thanks very much indeed for taking us through that realm. Well, right, there we are. Now I'm visible as well. So we've had a very interesting engagement, as we've already indicated. It has been truly international, and all the questions and the answers help us to appreciate that there are two elements that we've been focusing on. One is strategy that involves policy, and also the matter of attracting. Both of those have challenges, and there's a lot that Sri Lanka still needs to get done, especially when we heard the several comments to do with brand Sri Lanka, brand. Now, that is not something that happens with just facts and figures, but there's a great deal more that is involved with building the brand. And we had an interesting comparison that was brought to us with Ireland. Now, Ireland obviously has a brand, and they receive FDIs, and it has been very good for them. And the fact that they have some big players like Google, for instance, that have moved into Ireland has facilitated others taking serious note. Now, we also understand that the negative rating or the rating adjustment and the downward adjustment has not necessarily been good for this country. It might be that we can de-stress that and say, no, we have other things that really are going to work for us, but it does look like investors want to be sure that sovereign funds and so on and so forth come and are not going to be jeopardized in any way. So the ratings do matter, despite the remarks that were made. We've had a very interesting remark also made about small steps. Now that's both relevant in terms of strategy, and also making those incremental adjustments that will ultimately attract. So small steps is a good thing, and we need the right people. That was mentioned as well. A term that I just picked up and I thought that was interesting, economic diplomacy. So diplomacy is a factor that really somebody needs to work on and work at. We obviously have, it was not dealt with fully, but the opportunity exists for the missions, Sri Lanka missions, ambassadors and so on, to achieve a great deal more than they already are. And that really is something that will be both part of the strategy and also that which needs to be done for, for attracting. We also had some interesting points made by Insaf when he spoke about success stories. Yeah, there are success stories that need to be told. And are there success stories? That's something that, again, would be part of this attracting thing. And we need to do that. Then also the SMEs, small and medium enterprise. Their stories need to be told. They need to be exposed so that it is possible for those who are potential investors to see how it is that they can come in. So it's not only the big names, but SMEs also are something that needs to be done. So branding and diplomacy are factors that perhaps need to be focused on. From the remarks made by John Denton at the outset, we are able to recognize that the challenges are there and it won't be plain sailing, but why not make better use or fuller use of the ICC? Because they have this amazing network and that's something that needs to be exploited or made use of. So we just like to leave that thought with all of those who are here and who are interested in the aspect of policy and who might be able to influence policy. And that's something that needs to be perhaps looked at. So with that, we'd like to say thank you very much to all of those who were part of this. The panelists, we'd like to say thank you very much. Some, of course, have signed off already, but we did have the ambassador for Bangladesh in the Netherlands, His Excellency Riaz Hamidullah, and we had the chairman of the Board of Investment, Sanjay Mohtal, and we had Ms. Haja Alafifi, the chairperson of Unilever Sri Lanka, and she brought her experience into the scheme of things, and that was good because she served overseas in other venues as well before coming here to Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for those insights. Then we had Mr. Zahidul Amin, the co-founder of Partners in Bangladesh, Ray Ren, Chief Executive Officer of the Hambantota International Port, and Insaf, who's still with us, thank you very much. And Mario Gonzalez, well, from the Boston Consulting Group. So they were invited to create a kind of a portfolio, an action plan that can be handed over to Sri Lanka's government. And we hope that Mario will be able to do that. And unfortunately, we were not able to engage too much with Dr. Jürgen Borchardt. He was on a tight schedule and was not able to be with us. And say thank you to Aroshi as well as Dinesh Virakodi, Chairman of ICC SL, for engaging all of our panelists in this discussion. And one more time to say thank you very much to those who organized it. Indeed, ICC Sri Lanka, Boston Consulting Group, SEMA Sri Lanka, the Daily FT, so there'll be reports that will appear in the newspaper with relevance to our program today, the webinar. And we also had the partnership of the European Chamber of Commerce Sri Lanka. Thank you very much for being partners. And our sponsor of the webinar was Asean International Insurance Brokers. Thank you very much for fine support. And all of those who were with us on the Facebook pages on ICCSL, Daily FT, SEMA, and LNW, the Lanka News Web. Thank you very much. And take care, everybody, and bye for now.
I am now.